Romans have a republic. The problem with the republic is everyone's equal. And so if you come from a privileged background, you find this very annoying. So now there's a conspiracy to bring back the king. And this conspiracy was discovered, and everyone was caught and imprisoned. It turns out Lucius Brutus has two sons, okay? He has two sons, and they were both part of this conspiracy. They were tried by the Senate, and they were all sentenced to death, including the two sons of Lucius Brutus. Okay? The problem is this. The problem is the council has to oversee the execution of the prisoners. Whose council? Lucius Brutus' council. Okay? So Lucius Brutus has to oversee the execution of his two sons. Now, if Lucius Brutus is like, you know what, I'm going to resign my office, or hey, you know what, I'm sick, everyone would be like, we understand. Take the day off. Don't worry about it, okay? Instead, Lucius Brutus showed up for work, and he oversaw the execution of his two sons. All of Rome came to the execution. Okay? It was a public event. Everyone was watching the face of Lucius Brutus. Okay? We know the two sons are going to die. They're going to get beheaded. But everyone wanted to see Lucius Brutus' reactions. He was crying throughout the execution. These are to his two sons, right? He has no more sons. This is his legacy now. And his two sons are about to be killed. In fact, he's the one charged with killing his own sons. And he has to do it. He has no choice. So everyone's watching him. And throughout this process, he's crying. His tears are flowing down his face. He can't help himself. But he's still standing still, and he's still slowly ordering the execution of his two sons. And the Romans are just shocked by this public display. Okay? This is the idea of devotion, right? You are so devoted to Rome that you're willing to sacrifice your own children to ensure its survival and its glory. Tarquin the Proud hears about this, and he gets really angry. So he allies himself with kings, and they march against Rome. Lucius Brutus is consul. He's in charge of military. So he marches his army against Tarquin the Proud. One of the sons of Tarquin the Proud sees Lucius Brutus, and he charges ahead because he wants to kill the man who insulted his family. Lucius Brutus sees the king's son running. They're both on horses, right? Running, galloping towards him. And Lucius Brutus gets angry. And so he charges ahead as well. Lucius Brutus throws his spear, javelin. The king's son, the prince, throws his spear as well. And they spear each other to death. And they both die. Okay? And so Lucius Brutus is, at this point, considered the greatest Roman who ever lived. Okay? And for most of Roman history, he'll be considered the greatest Roman who ever lived, until Julius Caesar. Okay? And it was in the memory and honor of Lucius Brutus that they would assassinate Julius Caesar. But we'll discuss this next class. Right? Okay, so the king's army is overwhelming the Romans, and the Romans have to flee back into the city. There's a drawbridge that connects Rome to the mainland, okay? So there's the river Tiber crosses around Rome. There's a garrison that's supposed to be protecting the bridge, but they see the army coming, the enemy army marching towards them. They get scared, and they run all into Rome. One guy, his name is Coccos, he decides, I can't run away. Because I run away, the army just marches into Rome and kills everyone. So he decides to make a last stand. And it's just one guy. There's one random guy, okay? And what he does is he starts shouting insults at the enemy army. He's like, you guys are slaves. We're Romans. We will always be free. And the enemy army, and like there's thousands of them, okay? They have absolutely no idea what's going on. There's this one guy on a bridge shouting, insulting them, okay? So they freeze. Eventually, they realize, oh, this guy is just distracting us because his friends, the other soldiers, are trying to cut down the bridge. So they run to him. At this point, two other Romans, okay? Two officers run besides Cockles, and together, the three of them hold off the invading army together, okay, with their shields. They fight for their lives. Eventually, the bridge is about to be cut down, okay? The two officers run away, and Cockles makes the last stand. And the bridge falls, and what Cockles does is, before it falls completely, he jumps into the Tiber, and he survives. He doesn't drown. So this tells us, hey, anyone can be a hero of Rome, right? Lucius Brutus, he's the king's nephew. He's nobility. But Cockles, he's just an ordinary Roman who had the courage, he had the devotion to fight for Rome, okay? And by doing so, with his devotion, he's able to save Rome by himself. So Rome right now is surrounded by this huge army. And one young man, his name is Mucius, and he's a Roman nobleman, okay? He goes to the Senate, and he says to the Senate, listen, we're being surrounded by an enemy army. They're huge. We're starving to death. I have a plan to win this war. I'm going to swim across the Tiber, sneak into the enemy camp, and kill the enemy king, and this war will end. The Senate gives Mucius his approval, and Mucius sneaks into the enemy camp. It's payday, which means the soldiers are getting their wages, right? Mucius sneaks into the front, and he sees on the podium there are two individuals who are giving out wages to the soldiers. They both look like the king. One's a king, and one's a secretary. They look the same. Mucius doesn't know who's the king and who's the secretary. You know, at this point, an ordinary person would be like, I'll come back later, okay? Like, let me figure out, let me spy first and figure out who the king is, and then when a better opportunity arises, I'll kill the king. Mucius is like, it's 50-50, man. So he takes his knife, rushes to the podium, and stabs one of the men who happens to be the secretary, okay? So he's arrested, and the king is now interrogating him. He wants to know if there are other spies in the camp. And the king says to Mucius, tell me the truth, or I will burn you alive, okay? And he shows Mucius the pyre, okay, with this huge fire. Mucius says, I am one of 100 young Romans who have pledged their lives to kill you to free Rome. Okay, he's lying. This is not true. You kill me, there'll be 99 more. Okay? We are not afraid of you. You say you will burn me if I do not tell you the truth? Now what he does is he puts his hand into the fire. His hand is burning, okay? And he holds it together. And what makes him hold it together is what he sees is the face of Lucius Brutus as he orders the execution of his two sons, right? Because ordering the execution of your two sons is a lot harder than burning your hand alive, okay? Than burning your hand. And the king, he looks at this, and he thinks, the Romans are the craziest bastards I have ever met. Screw this, I'm going home. And he lets Mucius go. And the war is over. Okay? And that's how the Roman Republic survived the invasion and became the Republic. So this is the history of Rome. And this history is something that can be taught to anyone who becomes a citizen. If you are a Roman, it's because you believe in this history. Believing in this history, knowing this history, is what makes you a Roman. Okay? So that's the first concept. Piety, loyalty to Rome. Second concept that makes Rome unique or powerful is the idea of liberty. Okay? What Claudius did, what Lucius did, what Lucius Brutus did was preserve the liberty of Rome. Remember, what liberty means is respecting and following the laws, institutions, and history of Rome. Because that's what makes Rome, Rome. That's what allows you to have freedom. Okay? And that's why in 216, even though Hannibal had defeated the Romans refused to surrender. Because surrendering would mean surrendering their liberty. Right? Because Hannibal would impose peace terms. That would make basically Rome into a client state of Carthage. They would lose their liberty. Right? And if you don't have liberty, your life isn't worth living. Give me life or give me liberty. Okay? The third element of Roman greatness is the idea of re publica. Right? So what this means is every nobleman, if you have the ability, you want to serve Rome. Okay? So what they did was this. They turned Roman politics into a competition to produce the best man. Okay? It was basically a meritocracy. So once you had the financial means, you stood for election. And this system was basically a meritocracy. Okay? You first stood for election to become an aedile, and then you became a praetor, and then you became a consul. Once you were a consul, you had the opportunity to win the highest glory. Okay? What you could do is become a governor of a faraway province. And if you are governor of this faraway province, and you can win more territory for Rome, then you'll be given something called a triumph. Triumph. Triumph is a big parade where you are celebrated by all the Roman people. And that's what every Roman soldier aspired to become a great general who would receive his own triumph because he's won new territory for Rome. Okay? And that's why, even though a third of the Roman Senate was wiped out by Hannibal, they didn't give up because the other people were like, okay, now here's my opportunity to prove myself. Right? And one of these young people, his name is Scipio, he would go on and lead an army into Spain, conquer Spain, and then lead an army against Hannibal in North Africa, in Carthage, and destroy Hannibal. Okay? Because the point of life is to receive the triumph. And if you receive the triumph, then you will be remembered by Romans in their history, which is what gives your life meaning. Okay. All right. So do we understand these concepts? Piety, liberty, and republica, because they are the essence of the Roman identity. And they are what made Rome great. Sure.
Can you explain again why the king executed his two sons?
Okay. All right. So sorry. Lucius Brutus. Okay. Lucius Brutus overthrew the king, and he established the Roman Republic. The Roman Republic is now a nation of laws. His two sons are princes, and they lost their privileges. So they partake in this conspiracy to bring back the king. Right? This conspiracy was discovered, and as punishment, they were all sentenced to death because they wanted to destroy the republic and bring back the king. Okay, does that make sense? So, what the story, and again, we don't know if these stories are true. They're probably not true, okay? But what this story is telling us is if the founder of the Roman Republic can sacrifice his family in order to make sure the republic survives, well, you can as well. Okay? No sacrifice, every sacrifice must be made to ensure Roman greatness. That's basically the message. Right? Any more questions?
Are these recorded in books or history?
That's a great question, okay? So how do we know this? The answer is this. For most of this time, this is what we call oral history. Okay? So this is like, mythology, and it was basically passed from generation to generation. This oral history was written down in books. But because Rome was at war so much, Rome was conquered once, and Rome was burnt down, and so we lost a lot of the written history, okay? Now, the problem with oral history is there are different versions of oral history, okay? So there are different versions of these stories. And then a man named Livy, during the time of the Roman Empire, when it was first founded, he sat down to write the official history of Rome. And this is where we get all these stories from. Okay? And again, we don't believe these stories to be that true, okay? Lucius Brutus was probably a real person, but whether or not he did these things, we don't know, okay? It's debatable. But what matters is, this is what Romans believed, okay? You understand? What matters is what they believe as opposed to what really happened. And this is what creates the Roman identity. All right? Great. Any more questions? Okay. So, yeah, I mean, that's basically it, okay? This is what made Rome great, and that's what allowed them to come back from the defeats that Hannibal inflicted on them to eventually win the war. Okay? Any more questions?
Yeah, I've got a question about when talking about how Rome built a 80,000 people army.
80,000 army against Hannibal, yes.
Yes, so they built it within 2 years or something.
Hmm.
But before that, the enemies are like 40,000, and that's a lot more than the Romans. Then how did it take the time to build the army? Why wouldn't the army just...
Okay, that's a great question, okay? So, like, you want to know more about Hannibal's invasion of Italy, right? Okay, all right. So, what Rome is able to do is offer citizenship to anyone who fights for Rome. And Rome has been, for the longest time, been fighting its neighbors, right? Once it conquered its neighbors promised to send soldiers to Rome in times of war. So Rome is able to draw on soldiers from all around the Italian peninsula. Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing is that when Hannibal invaded Italy, he was doing so with many Gauls, okay, who are the invaders of Italy. And these Gauls have traditionally been the enemy of the Italians. So when Hannibal did so, Rome's neighbors rallied to Rome's support, to support Rome, okay, because they saw the Gauls and Hannibal as invaders who threatened their culture. Okay, the second thing. The third thing is Hannibal had an invading army, right? But he had no organizational and logistic support. He had no food supply because he was basically doing this on his own initiative. Carthage is too far away, okay? And Rome had the best navy in the Mediterranean. So there was no way that Carthage could resupply Hannibal. So there's no way Carthage could resupply Hannibal, right? So Hannibal was forced to spend a lot of time foraging for food. Do you understand? And that's ultimately why he lost the war. Because it's possible for you to win all these battles because you're a military genius, but you still have to feed your soldiers. And what Rome did after the Battle of Canaan was they recognized this fact. They recognized that Hannibal's main problem was logistics, and they started to they decided we will never fight Hannibal in a battle again. We will cut off his food supply. Okay, and so Hannibal had to spend most of his time foraging for food. Meanwhile, Rome could rebuild itself by freeing its slaves, okay, and by recruiting more neighbors to join their cause. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. That's why armies don't win wars. Nations win wars. Does that make sense? So another thing that you need to understand is, while Hannibal was winning glory in Italy, the council of elders in Carthage, were they happy about this, do you think? These are business people, right? Are they happy about this? They're not happy about this because, one, it's going to cost them a lot of money to continue the war. And listen, Italy is poor, so there's no profit to be made from conquering Rome. Okay? That's the first problem. Second problem is, if Hannibal were to win glory in Italy, he'd probably come back and make himself king of Carthage, right? Does that make sense? So Hannibal was being undermined by Carthage itself, even though Hannibal was trying to save Carthage. Does that make sense? And that's what makes Rome unique. Rome has been united for most of its history, whereas most places like Greece and Carthage were divided into different political factions. And that's what caused Carthage to ultimately be undermined. So ultimately, Rome was able to come back from this defeat and defeat Carthage, because Carthage, again, saw Hannibal as big as a threat as Rome, okay? This would be costly for Carthage, because after the war is over, 50 years later, a Roman senator named Cato the Elder, he visits Carthage because he's curious what's happened to Carthage after the end of the war. And to his dismay and to his shock, Carthage has become wealthier than ever before. Okay? 50 years of peace means that Carthage is able to accumulate more wealth than ever before. It has so much wealth that it is able to pay off the indemnity that Rome imposed on it. Okay? It's basically able to pay Rome off. And Cato the Elder, he is traumatized by this. He goes back to Rome and says, we have to destroy Carthage. Okay, there's a huge debate in the Senate. He says, listen, if we let Carthage survive, Carthage will always be a threat to us. And the other senators were like, listen, Cato, I know you want to destroy Carthage, but remember, Carthage threatens us. If we destroy Carthage, we, Rome, will no longer have an enemy. We will no longer have a threat. We will change as a people if we destroy Carthage. But Cato the Elder insisted, and eventually an army was dispatched to destroy Carthage. The Romans have a habit of always blaming the enemies for starting the war, okay? So they didn't want to instigate the war. So they made up these dumb excuses and said that Carthage was violating the peace treaty. And the Romans said to Carthage, listen, if you surrender all your weapons, we will go away. The Carthaginians believed the Romans and thought if they surrender all the weapons, they go away. The Romans got all these weapons. They were like, we didn't expect this, man. So the Romans said to the Carthaginians, you know what? We also need you to move your city from the coast 10 kilometers inland. Okay? And at this point, the Carthaginians knew Rome was going to destroy Carthage. So there's a 3-year siege, and then at the end of it, Rome conquered Carthage, killed everyone inside, enslaved others, burned all the books, and wiped out Carthage from history, as well as the history books. Okay? So that's a Roman mentality. Devotion means all or nothing. Okay? You don't surrender, but you also don't show mercy to your enemies. Okay? So Hannibal was right. Rome was a threat to Carthage. But because Carthage has a merchant culture run by business people, they could never recognize the threat. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. Any more questions?